No, yeah, however you like, John.
What were your ambitions as a young lad in Broughton, WA?
Oh, look, I think from the age of about 12, I wanted to be a writer. I can remember filling out some questionnaire at school. I think it was, where you go into high school, and you had to say what you wanted to do, and I remember putting that down, and I think, causing a lot of consternation for my father in particular, who was a butcher and who thought that I'd have some education and would do something useful, think he was hoping I'd put down lawyer or doctor or something. So that was a general ambition, and then the music started, and I think I was just talking to somebody about this yesterday, that the great thing about playing then and now when I get together with the band infrequently and play is that you didn't actually have any ambition. You just wanted to play your songs, and I guess you sort of, if you had an ambition, it was to play live to an audience somewhere, which usually was either going to be a youth show or a pub, and that was about as far as the ambitions extended.
And one of your early musical outputs was an outfit by the name of Puss. Yes. Can you tell us about them?
Yeah, I had this idea of the sort of music that I liked around about the time of finishing school. So, when you're sort of 16, 17, 18, I heavily liked bands like the Fugs, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. And while I didn't actually have any of the albums at that stage of Iggy and the Stooges or MC5, I'd read about them in magazines that I used to get, Circus and Hullabaloo. I think originally it was Hullabaloo, and that magazine got changed to Circus, which was an American magazine, and my friends and I from school would eagerly race to the newsagents and grab a copy and read it. And so I'd read about the punk performances of these bands and Iggy gouging himself with drumsticks. So I really liked the idea of having this completely over-the-top act mixed with an anti-music, if you like, that the Fugs and the Mothers used to do. And so that was the inspiration for Puss. And also we weren't very good at playing, so we had to play those real garage sounds. And so Puss was an ultimate garage band. I think we used to do a really good version of Sweet Jane. That was one thing which was sort of really rough and raw, again because we didn't have any polish. So Lou Reed and the Velvets, they also fitted into us because they didn't sound like they could play all that well either. So I formed that in 1972, I think, or it could have been 71, and I think we rehearsed for about 2 years, and every time we looked like we were going to get a gig, the drummer would leave. One drummer left because his girlfriend didn't want him to play in a band anymore. It was all that sort of stuff. So eventually we played a show in 1973 at Steve's Hotel. We played one gig, and then the next year, 1974, I actually started playing quite regularly at a place called the Governor Broome Hotel in Perth. And then in 1975, kept that through 74, 75 at the Red Lion Hotel in Perth, and then I went to England, disbanded Puss and went to England after that for a year or so. So I guess Puss was as far as I know, it was the first punk band. But here in Australia, it was certainly predated Sex Pistols, but we weren't as pure as the Sex Pistols. I guess we did have some elements of that thing. We hadn't refined it, and then when I was away overseas, by that stage I sort of moved on from the total anti-feeling of punk, and I looked at the songs that I was writing, and some of them had that garage punk drive like Hot Crutch and Suburban Boy, but there was a lot of other areas too. So I then modulated, if you like, and modified the whole concept, and it became the Suburbs.
How would you describe the music scene that was happening in Perth in those early days? Was it a lively scene at all?
It was lively in that there were a lot of bands that played live, especially in the pubs, but it was a very big cover bands scene. There was no one played original music that I can recall. There might be a band that played, I think Bakery played there, and Bakery were basically at that stage a cover band, and they were the zenith of the bands there, and they had one think, one or two originals. Maybe it was only one, maybe it was only Golden Miles, the Lindsay Wells one that he did later. But certainly, there was really no original stuff. There were bands that were playing things that were definitely interesting. There was a jug band called Mud that was a big sort of influence on me, and there were the guys from Sid Rumpo who played. I think they might have had some original songs, but it was very heavily into that boogie type of sound, and songs like Wang Dang Doodle and traditional bluesy sort of songs that they up-rocked a bit. So it was healthy. There was a lot of really good musicians playing there, but no one was really writing. No one believed that if they wrote their own songs that anyone would come and listen to them.
Yeah.
And I think that was the huge hurdle to overcome. And my belief was that the only real way that you could get people to come and listen to your original songs was if the stage act was compelling. I thought otherwise it was right. There was just no way, because no one would play your songs on the radio. There was no internet. There was nothing like there is now. There was no Triple J. There was no alternative music at all. So your only option was to go and actually be somehow riveting enough on stage to get people to come back through the door. And so that was the plan of attack that I used with Puss and then with the Suburbs.
Now, as you say, some of those songs from the first album, The Suburbs, were written during time you spent in London. Would those songs have come out anyway, do you think, had you not spent that time overseas?
No, I think some of them would have, and a lot of them wouldn't. I think that element of being away from your locale and your prime inspirational area is very good. That detachment, I think that gave a lot of gave me a lot more insight into who I was and what Australia was, and the sort of life that I'd been living. I, like everybody else, I think, just about, who grew up in Australia in the 50s and 60s, I wanted to get out of there, and I sort of saw it as a bit of a cultural desert. If anybody represented Australia, it was always in that Chips Rafferty way, which I found from Perth really false. It didn't ring true for me. But by going to the UK, I think I got a lot better idea, because then I actually started to get annoyed when I'd read articles by expatriate Australian journalists saying that Australians were just a bunch of yobs, and I started to get defensive then. So the song Convict Street came about after I read one of those articles, thinking, well, yes, we have all of this. A lot of that stuff is right, but there's also a lot of great things about Australia. There was a certain rawness and energy in Australia that you certainly didn't find in the UK at that time, 75, 76.
Yeah.
It really felt like a decaying society there, and whereas Australia was much more energised. And when I came back, things had... Skyhooks were just starting, but by the time I came back in those intervening 18 months, the whole scene had started to kick along a lot more, and Australia was much more receptive to original material as well.
So were you surprised by the commercial success you had with Mug's Game?
I wasn't. I was too young to be surprised at that stage. I actually thought that I knew from the reaction of the crowds that we had that we were presenting something that a large proportion of the youth population identified with. People who'd been disenfranchised, if you like, by other bands, feeling that the only way they could succeed was to sound as if they came from LA or London, and I could see, physically that it was working. I could see the crowds coming in, see the people jumping up and down on the tables. So I was not surprised. I should have been, in retrospect. But, I was just so certain at that stage that what I was doing was right and had an audience. And I actually remember when I was doing a Mushroom 25 Years, a documentary that I did with Kimball Rendell around about the time of the Mushroom concert, interviewing Tim Finn, and he was saying something. He said very, very similar thing about Split Ends. I mean, they had no doubt about the fact that they were going to succeed and that they had something to offer. And as he said, if you didn't have that when you were a young band, well, you weren't going to succeed. You had to believe absolutely in yourself. Later on, I got to realise when things got a lot harder, just how difficult it had been to get to that stage, or, how lucky we'd been perhaps to so rapidly, have some success. But that was hindsight.
Now, the term suburban rock, I guess that was a label you put upon yourself?
Yes, that came when I was in England, and I had Suburban Boy. I'd already written and performed that in Puss. I wrote that in about 73. But I wrote a whole lot of other songs that, for example, appeared on Mug's Game, like Oklahoma, other songs or Campus Days, other songs that I've never recorded but were sort of quite integral to my act in those days, which I hope at some stage to record. And when I looked over all these different songs in quite different styles, the only sort of loose canopy that I could get was that they were all somehow reflective of me and my surroundings and the people that I mixed with. And so I figured, well, okay, I'm going to call it the band Dave Warner's from the Suburbs when I go back and do something, and I'm going to call it Suburban Rock, because that's what I was trying to do, was to and this is a bit wanky now, but again, when you're young, you can have that sort of pretentiousness. I wanted to elevate the toaster, the Laminex table, and the box of Wheaties and Saturday at the football. I wanted to create an art, a pop art out of that, if you like.
Yeah.
And I took that quite seriously, so I've read the people that I read heavy authors like Gunter Grass and Thomas Pynchon, and I'd go to the Tate Art Gallery and look at Max Beckman paintings and things, and they'd taken what had made them strong, I figured, was that they had taken their culture and analysed themselves and sort of tried to spread it out in some way, and so that was what I tried to do, and I felt that was a way to communicate to people what it was. It's a lot easier if you can give people a label or something, so that was the label I came up with.
Cool. Did you find it a restrictive label maybe later on in your career when perhaps you might have been looking to broaden the subject matter of your songwriting?
I think it was restrictive in the marketing and promotional expectations placed upon you by distributors and recording companies. Like Mushroom were a pretty good recording company. They were pretty hip at the time, but even so, their concept of a marketing or promotion function was always, well, we'll have some meat pies and sauce, or we'll do something at the footy. They saw Dave was from the Suburbs, and maybe half of my fans did too, as an equivalent of Kangaroos, meat pies and Holden cars, which was not what I was saying, not what I thought I was saying at all, because, yeah, I like to meat pie and all, but my life didn't revolve around kangaroos and meat pies, So I think it may have been difficult. It probably created impediments later, because I think people, when that flush of Aussie pride went by about the late 70s, I think, and you needed to be FM or universal in appeal, I think people probably saw what I was doing then as being, Chips Rafferty-ish, the very thing that I tried it not to be, if you like. But having said that, it's interesting to see now how often that theme, that suburban theme, and somebody may well have done it before me, but certainly that's come through in cinema, in Australian cinema, in Australian art. So I think I don't think it's dated in that sense at all, and in fact now I can go and play the same songs, and I don't, to me it doesn't feel like I'm stuck in a particular period, because the concept was integral and central to it, rather than the fashion and the music.
Yeah.
So, if you go and see Wah Wah Nee or Pseudo Echo now, there's no doubt that if you're getting into that, you're purely getting into that as on a sort of level of nostalgia and kitsch. The songs could still be good, don't get me, the music could still be good, but the overriding thing is, that is definitely placed in that era of Australia. And some of my things, listening to some of the songs, some elements of them are, but I can go and do halftime with the football or Mug's Game and Suburban Boy now, and it's pretty timeless,
In those days, were you actively looking around for subject matter to write about? Were you one of those writers that always had a notebook at hand and putting down ideas as you went?
I didn't have the notebook. It just would hit me like I tended to write in huge bursts when I was in England and not doing much. I had tons of time to write. And then when I came back to Australia, I was rehearsing with the band and just living that life of full-time musician pretty much. I'd just sit down in the morning and 2 or 3 song ideas would come to me. I found it very difficult once I was playing and touring continually to do that, to have that same creative energy, and that's one of the reasons why I stopped. One of the reasons why I stopped playing full time. I just felt that I was doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
But I didn't actually, I didn't have the notebook and do that sort of thing. It just sort of sat down and some idea would come to me, a riff, or usually a riff and the words together. Or I'd think, oh, gee, it'd be great to do a song like You Really Got Me or something, So I'd try and think in terms of some song that I liked, not do the same riff, but think, okay, what was there about that? Okay, it's a song about teenage angst or teenage lust, and it's got a heavy bass riff, so what can I find like that? So those were the sorts of things, I suppose.
Yeah. The Suburbs came around at a time when that pub rock scene was really starting to flourish here in Australia, and I guess it was a scene that you were well suited to. Did you feel you benefited there from good timing?
Yeah, to some extent. In Western Australia, we pretty much we were part of creating that whole scene, so it wasn't like there was a scene that was happening before us, and that may sound immodest, but it's the fact. There was, I think, one hotel, the Victoria Hotel in Subiaco, had the Beagle Boys on around the time I was playing, and I think there was Keaton's Hotel in Fremantle that had some bands playing, but the pubs wouldn't pay for bands to play original material, as we just talked about. They figured that no one would come, so my suggestion was, okay, well, what you do is I'll do a door deal and I'll take the door and a cover charge. And they said, well, no one will come and see an original band playing. And I said, well, that's my risk, I'll take it. And actually started at the Victoria Hotel and then Shenton Park Hotel and the Raffles Hotel. It actually began a scene, and at a similar time some bands who were primarily cover bands, Loaded Dice, this is only Western Australia I'm talking about, bands like Loaded Dice, who were going around the same time as us, who just preceded us, they also had strong groups, and they started doing the same thing. And we used to liaise on the phone, the bands, and say, well, what sort of deal have you got there? And so we actually instituted a pub circuit. It just didn't exist before. And it was driven by the bands, and we then went back to the hotels and said, okay, well, we're now getting the amount of people that you'd get if you were paying a cover band, so I want you to pay us. This was a foreign concept to them. Pay us what you would be paying them anyway, because we're bringing that many people in and we get the door. And then we actually did start to make some reasonable money, because we were getting like a baseline fee, plus we were getting the door as well. And some of that we brought over and introduced to places like Melbourne. That was pretty unheard of at the time. It was a lot harder in Melbourne because there were promoters going. Now, in answer to your question, did we benefit? We certainly benefited from the fact that there was a number of gigs established and a circuit established, and we very heavily benefited, I think, from touring with Skyhooks on one of our first tours across to the eastern states. Mushroom. They're obviously a Mushroom act, and Michael Gudinski put us on supporting them, particularly in Sydney, and that worked extremely well for us. I think that pub thing was great, but it was always difficult for us to get to the next big concert level, because we had very little. We never really had any FM radio support, and I'd always thought that would be a great boost to the Suburbs and a few bands like us, but in actual fact, we had more support from the AM stations.
How do you look back on the two post-Suburbs albums you did, Correct Weight and This Is My Planet? The great songs on there. Do you think perhaps they may have benefited from having a band like the Suburbs behind you?
I think definitely Correct Weight. To me, those songs, and I'm thinking of actually re-recording a number of those songs. I think had we played those out 6 months live and just shaped them up a bit and worked them as we had done the other songs with that benefit, it would have been a much, much better album. It still sounds to me like it's better than a demo album, but it still sounds, like it's unfinished to me, a lot of the tracks.
Yeah.
And a lot of the production doesn't sound to me exactly how I wanted to hear it. This Is My Planet, that was different. I don't think that was different. I played a lot of those songs live. I actually think, and when I play those songs now, they stand up really well. I think that was probably the best album that I did, and I'm very frustrated that it was not successful or pretty well ignored, except for, as I still recall, Ed St. John in Rolling Stone completely slagging me off on that, and that's a great disappointment to me because I thought that's a strong album, and when I play those songs, I can see the reaction in the audience, and I think the whole idea of the album, it just, I just didn't get what I needed to drive through to sell the album to whoever needed to program it, that was the missing thing. So, but definitely on Correct Weight, I think that would have benefited greatly. And as I say, I'm contemplating re-recording a few of those tracks.
Now, there's a wonderful documentary you did around the time of This Is My Planet, The Water in the Wild, which I have at home, and I sense from that you are feeling that perhaps you were getting a little bit tired of the road at that stage.
Look, that's a very... it certainly looks like that, doesn't it, on the screen? This is one of those things, without a lie, the day that we were due to do that tour, or it might have been the day before, I woke up and I really didn't feel too good. And it was a tour through the northwest, for those people who don't know what we're talking about, but it was a tour that went from Perth all the way up to the mining towns of Port Hedland and stuff, and you really need to be in good form. But I had a flu through pretty much the first two-thirds to three-quarters of that, and I felt really shithouse, and it was very hard. So it looks like I'm a lot more jaded than what I felt. That was purely a physical thing. I was not mentally jaded for that. In fact, I would have loved to have gone up and done it again at a time when I was a bit more on top of things. But it certainly looks like it. And travelling, to places like Marble Bar in 40 degrees heat was physically demanding anyway.
Yeah,
but it was a great experience, and a difficult experience as you see, and there were certainly times in that, like when we had our biggest crowd ready for us at Dampier at the Mermaid Hotel, and then the power fuse wasn't right, and we had to cancel the gig and stuff, and that was very frustrating and down. But look, it looks like worse. I've been trying to get that on DVD. I think it might be, it'd be good to do as a DVD thing.
Oh, for sure.
But I can't find Wendy Campbell, who was the original producer, who'd have I tried very hard. I found a couple of the other producers, and they've said they haven't got the any of the original masters, so we could do something off the VHS, I guess. But it's a shame.
Yeah.
It was shot on I think 16mm or whatever.
Now, was it a tough decision for you to give away music as a full-time concern? Yes and no. One of the prime reasons, I was in Sydney in 81, and I got really bad asthma. I'd had asthma, as a kid and stuff, but I'd never had it really, really bad. But I got to the stage, I was living in Rockdale, and I don't know whether it was playing smoky gigs or what it was, but I got some infection, some lung infection, and it was almost like emphysema. I was coughing blood at night. I couldn't walk up the hill. I went to the doctor there, and he said, you got a shadow on your lung here. And I thought, this is all too hard. I'm going to go back to Perth where it's hot, dry climate and just take a break, which I did. And decided to use the time after that. The original Suburbs band were all off doing different things, or pretty much all off doing different things. So instead I concentrated on doing some other things that I'd always wanted to do, like stage shows and to try and start writing novels and TV things. So it wasn't hard in that sense, but what was hard was that, I really did miss performing to audiences that liked hearing the stuff. I didn't miss the bad shows. I didn't miss the 8 people at a Morwell disco who wanted to hear Johnny Farnham or something, but I certainly, missed those great magic moments.
Yeah.
And so we did a couple of tours every now and again for them. But also I think by that stage, when This Is My Planet wasn't successful, and that was an album, as I said to you, that I really thought was a good album, then I thought, well, what's the point of just bashing my head against the brick wall? No one would add me to a playlist. I heard songs of being added by other bands and stuff that I thought were really inferior to the songs that I'd done, and I said, oh, well, look at this. I'm obviously not hip, and there's no point me bashing my head against a brick wall, because if I just want to play, I can go down to the keyboard and play songs for myself.
Yeah.
So there was that. There was an element there that was, I guess, pushing me away from it, as well as the physical element of the asthma and stuff. But then I saw a bright new world and things that I'd always wanted to do anyway. As I said, from the time I was 12, I wanted to be a writer. So I saw it as an opportunity to pursue other things.
As a writer, which have you found more personally satisfying? A great song where you really hit the nail on the head, or a successful screenplay or novel?
I think as a writer, novel writing to me is probably the high. That's because what ends up there is as close as what you get to creating something yourself. You have a little bit of input, but not totally. Film and television television, generally speaking, if it's like a drama series or something, it's much more craft than creativity, so it's almost in a different category.
Yeah.
Feature film, you can get a great buzz out of actually doing that first draft or whatever, but then once other people become involved, it invariably changes, and it will never be exactly what you thought or wanted it to be. So it can be a bit frustrating. Writing a song is a strange thing, because it sort of does need to be performed in a way to find out how it goes. So it's hard to dissociate. While I wrote songs and really enjoyed writing songs, you still needed to play them to an audience in a way to make them real. And whereas didn't quite feel that with a novel. I don't know why. I sort of felt that the novel was real enough when it finished. Whether it sold to 5 people or 5,000 or whatever. But they're all slightly different. They all have slightly different satisfaction levels. But probably I go for novel writing as number one.
Are there any certain rules in the construction of any of those types of writing that perhaps govern all of them for you?
This is a very personal thing, and it doesn't. It really, I wouldn't say that this is the case for everyone, or maybe it's so blindingly obvious. But for all of those things, what gets me off is one central idea, whether it's a song or a novel. One central idea that just gives me a bit of a tingle, that I feel, well, this is just a really neat idea, or a film or whatever. And but the expression of how it comes about, that changes on almost every time I do something. So there's no complete rhyme or reason. I certainly with songwriting didn't have a formula, or I may have without knowing it, but I certainly didn't sit down and say I'm going to put the bridge here and then a double chorus and stuff. It was just what felt right for the song. With novel writing, I started off how I did with songwriting, pretty much at whatever point A was that came to me, and just keep revising it until I got to point Z. That's how I started off. Now I'm a little bit better at planning and putting those things through. And similarly with screenplays. But all of them for me have some initial point of inspiration, and that's usually one, idea that I think, wow, that's a really good idea. That's exciting. And that might be a riff with a couple of fragments of words, or it could be a concept that I can build a film around, or a crime that I think, gee, that's a good way to do a book.
Now, record companies and book publishers, are they a similar type of beast to deal with? No, I'd have to say that I've found all the publishing companies that I've dealt with to be completely gentlemanly, erudite, and just, what could I say, people that you'd feel quite happy to have to a barbecue, around at your place. Record companies, on the other hand, are driven by, I always feel record companies are driven by guys who would have been sock salesmen at Soho markets or something if they weren't running a record company. And I've always found it more difficult to relate to those people. Now, just before I let you go, Dave, you've dabbled in so many areas over the years, from novelist to music to even football commentary. Is there anything left that you'd like to have a go at?
I'd like to get better at the things that I do. I've got to. I just enjoy that creative aspect so much. There's nothing. I don't think there's anything particularly that. At my age now, that I'd really sort of want to have a go at, but I'd still like to get better at doing the things that I do, and to relive some of the things. And I'd recently done some gigs with the Suburbs, and they were great fun. I'd like to do a few more of those, but just to keep it at that fun amateur level. And certainly with screenwriting and books, I'd like to keep doing that and get a couple of killer projects there. That'd keep me more than satisfied.
And just to finish up, what would you consider your ultimate statement in song? Is there one song which best sums up what you're about as a songwriter?
No, probably no. I mean, there's songs, or it might vary from time to time.
Yeah.
There is certainly in the song "Suburban Rock" there were some credo statements, if you like, that at Suburban Rock rather than Suburban Boy. But no, I sort of see them more as a whole, as a body of work rather than one individual. I don't think I've quite managed to do that yet.
But Dave, thanks so much for your time. It's been an absolute treat to catch up with you.
Oh, very much. Well, thanks for taking the trouble to catch up with me.
Fantastic. Congratulations on one of the most diverse careers in the Australian entertainment industry.
Oh, thanks a lot, John.
All the best.
Ta.
Yes.